Greetings everyone in comms theory and research class. This is Professor Theo. This is in regards to an assignment I want you to begin on this evening, working on it into Monday, and we'll begin to work more in class on Tuesday. I'll come around to each individual and to see where you're at and to give you some feedback as well as to give you some guidance into how to do two particular things we want to do. One is we want to take your research statement that we've been working on. Hopefully I signed off on everyone. If not, I'll make sure make sure you email me so I can sign off on you before Tuesday. That way we can hit the ground running on Tuesday, but I'm pretty sure I have most of you all covered. We're going to take that research statement that you've been working on and we're going to begin to beef it up. So imagine that research statement was like the bare bones. It was the skeletal structure. And now we're going to begin to put some muscle on it, some meat on it, beef it up so it is ready to be inserted into your final research proposal. So we want to basically take those 3 or 4 lines, or maybe some of you have 4 or 5 lines, and we want to beef that up to probably about 2 paragraphs ideally, but the first paragraph is strictly kind of like an introductory paragraph. So I'll talk about that briefly, and that you could work on at a later date. I really want you to focus on just taking the research statement itself and beefing it up. But once it is beefed up, I will require that you do an introductory paragraph that just kind of jumps, instead of just jumping right in, that kind of introduces how you want to talk about your problem statement. And then we're also going to take the last part of that problem statement, which was in order to understand, which was the statement saying, why is it important? Why should we care? And we're going to beef that up until it becomes a section called significance of study. So in all research, you want to have a paragraph or a section called the significance of study. And it's basically where you tell the reader and other researchers and people who may be interested in research why the problem is significant, but specifically why your particular research is significant. Why is it important? Why should we care? And so you're going to take that research statement that you have and you're going to convert it into 2 different things. One, you're going to convert it into what we're going to call the purpose of study. That's the beefing up of the research question, the research statement for the most part. And then the second part is going to be to beef it up to a second section called significance of study. And then finally, we're going to conclude by looking at some research questions. And so what I would suggest is if you go on the Canvas and download, there's a new document on there entitled Purpose of Study, Significance of Study, and Research Questions. It's a 2-page document, and it basically, I took my purpose of study and significant study from my dissertation, and I took it verbatim, but I did kind of take out a little bit, I took out a couple things just to tighten it up a little bit. For the most part, it's pretty verbatim. And then I took out my research questions. And so if you download that document, it's going to start off with my research statement that looks similar to the one that you have. It's a little beefed up, but for the most part, it's similar to what you have. And I'm going to walk you through how we beefed it up. So let's look at the research statement that I started with. It says, I am studying African American males. So right away, your research statement should tell you who. So what's the demographic? African American males, or women, or students, or pastors' kids in some cases, men who've been assaulted. There's someone doing something on that. Children who had parents who were incarcerated. So right off the bat, we should know who you're studying. So I'm studying African American males. And then you want to know what have they done, or what do you want to find out. So I'm studying African American males who overcame the negative effects of fatherlessness. And I could make that claim as far as negative effects because of previous research that I conducted. So who overcame the negative effects of fatherlessness and successfully broke the cycle of fatherlessness within their own life. So that successfully broke the cycle of fatherlessness. That was what was unique about my particular study. So there's been other studies about men or women, or whether white, black, or Hispanic, who have had to overcome fatherlessness, or at least had to deal with fatherlessness. So there's lots of studies out there as far as here are the effects of fatherlessness. What I wanted my study to specifically look at is how black men overcame those effects and broke the cycle. All said, now I'm planting a very unique flag, looking at how they overcame and broke the cycle. It says, I want to find out what those negative effects were. And the reason why I want to find that out is it's crucial to my study. I can't say how they overcome the effects until I first establish what those effects are. So I want to find out what the negative effects were, but then I tie in the communication piece. And it's going to be important that you all make sure you tie in the communication piece. So from a communication standpoint, I want to find out what messages helped them overcome those effects. And secondly, who delivered those messages. Because remember, this is a research paper in communication. So I couldn't just look at the negative effects. I couldn't just look at how they overcame those effects. I had to find out from a communication standpoint what messages were communicated to them. And number two, who communicated those messages. And finally, this is in order to understand, and here's why it's important, how many others who are fatherless can overcome similar effects and break the cycle of fatherlessness within their own lives. So when someone says, well, why should we care? Well, you should care because I wanted to do the type of research that was going to help others overcome. So I let you know who I was studying, African American males who overcame the negative effects of fatherlessness and broke the cycle. That's what my unique thing, my unique contribution. And I wanted to find out what those negative effects were, and that was because I had to find it out in order to see how they overcame them. What were the messages that helped them overcome? Who delivered those messages? And it was important because I wanted to help others break that cycle. So that's my statement. And you all have similar statements where you're telling me who it was, what it is you're looking at, and why it's important. So now the goal is to take that statement, and my statement is 5 lines long, and we want to beef it up. So if you look on that document where it says the purpose of this study, that very first paragraph we can deal with at a later date, but it's just an introduction. Instead of just jumping into here's the primary purpose of my study, I found one of my professors always told me introduce everything. Each new section should have its own introduction. So that first paragraph simply talks about how a father's absence can be directly and indirectly communicated. Because once again, I want to tie that communication in. And then I say how those negative messages negative effects normally are the byproduct, but every now and then there are some success stories. So I introduce that. And we'll talk about that later. That's a paragraph you can work on later. The paragraph I want you to start working on now is the second paragraph. And this is where I say the primary purpose of this study is to examine the success narratives or success stories of African American males who were able to overcome their father's absence and experience various successes in life. So that is a reiteration or another version of what I said earlier, but it just sounds more academic. I'm saying specifically I want to look at the success stories, which is why I did qualitative. I looked at the narratives, the stories, when I interviewed people. So now you begin to use certain terminologies that are more conducive to either quantitative or qualitative. So I said I want to examine, and so you want to investigate. You want to study, you want to determine, depending upon what it is. So if you're talking about quantitative, you probably want to determine first versus investigate or examine. Because you want to establish that those problems exist. And I simply added in that some of those successes in life may include academic, economic, athletic, professional, etc. So I'm just fleshing out what it means when I say who have experienced success in life. So what you want to begin to do is operationalize. Remember we talked about if you're going to measure, say if you want to measure happiness, you got to talk about what happiness would look like. If you want to see, for some of you, you want to see how they overcame the effects of incarcerated parents or overcame how they reacted to sexual assault. You got to define when you say if they were successful or if they were happy. things of that nature. You need to begin to spell that out. So when I said those who had experienced various successes, I just simply gave some examples of what some of those successes may be: academic, economic, athletic, professional, etc. And that list does not have to be exhaustive. But I said I was specifically focused on their ability to break the cycle of fatherlessness by becoming active participants within the lives of their own children. So remember, my whole unique contribution is I'm looking at how they overcame fatherlessness. So it would be great if I established that they overcame the effects by excelling academically, that they overcame the effects by excelling in their job. That would be great, but the ultimate evidence that I want to show of them overcoming the effects was that they were now active participants in the lives of their children. So I had to spell that out. So make sure whatever it is you're trying to measure, if you have a certain standard of how you're going to know that that thing exists, put that in there. So I had to put that the primary way I'll know that they were successful is that they are now active fathers. So I put that in there. And then I went into some specifics from a communication standpoint. There would be an examination. So once again, use one of those words: investigation, examination, determination. There would be an examination of the many positive messages that have been communicated to these males that have helped encourage, challenge, and equip them to overcome the many effects of their father's absence. Finally, there'll be an investigation into the availability as well as the viability of father figures within the lives of the respondents. And respondents is another word for participants. And the reason why I was able to choose that word father figures is because of previous research I did, that term father figure came up. And in my research, I had to define what I meant by father figure. And in this case, it meant anyone, whether it was a biological mother, or was a pastor, a mentor. So it didn't have to necessarily be male, but anyone who they deemed to be the person who stood in the gap for them to help them out. So I want to know what were the messages communicated to them, and who were these father figures, and how effective could a father figure be. So basically what I'm saying in that paragraph is the same that I'm saying in my research statement. It's just that it's beefed up. It sounds more academic. I'm using some research terminology. So what I could do is I can help you throw some words in there to make it sound better. But the main thing is to beef it up. To, if there's any confusion, to add clarity by saying, if you make a certain statement like, I wanted to see how they successfully broke the cycle, I gave examples of what that would look like. And I gave the primary example of that, meaning that they're spending time with their own children. So it's just an opportunity for you to take your statement, to add clarity to it, to beef it up, to make it more understandable. And then, like I said, that first paragraph is an introductory paragraph that we could work on later. So what I want you to start doing over the next couple of days is to take your research statement and to beef it up into this purpose of study. Next, the significance of study. So when I said in my research statement that in order to understand how others who are fatherless can overcome similar effects and break the cycle in their own lives, I basically took that and beefed it up. And once again, that first paragraph talks about how my study is going to contribute. So in order to work on this paragraph, you got to know what's been done already, what hasn't been done, and you're basically saying, I'm going to contribute to the research by maybe doing something that's already been done, so adding to the research. So I am adding to the research on fatherlessness in general, but I'm also going to add something specific when it comes to African American fatherlessness. I'm going to add something specific when it comes to overcoming. So what you want to do is start off general and say that I'm adding to the research on this general study on the effects of parental incarceration or the effects of having children of pastors' kids. But then you want to begin to say that I'm going to also add to some specific areas and narrow it down with your unique contribution to the study. And then that second paragraph is just once again beefing up some of the things that you're going to be looking at. Who's going to benefit? What types of people will want to read your research? What areas of research may your research fall under? So it's not just communication and maybe sociology, psychology, maybe theology for those who have a theological bent. So you want to tell the reader, here's the type of people who will benefit from this research. Here's the type of areas in which this research is going to be beneficial. But overall, you want to justify why it's significant. You want to justify that what I'm talking about is a major problem, and more importantly, I'm also offering, hopefully, a viable solution. So you want to justify, you want to get us on board and convince us of why this is significant. So you're going to take that last line that you had in your research statement, the "in order to understand" line, which was supposed to communicate the importance, and then you really want to beef that up. And I would say, once again, shoot for 2 paragraphs, but you can also get it done in one nice sized paragraph. The key is to make sure you're covering all your bases to really justify why this is important. And then finally, on this document, you have my research questions. I have 6 research questions. I would say you should shoot for 3 at the minimum, so 3 to 4 would be ideal. Everyone at least needs to have 3. I would say 4 at the most. And the whole idea is to make sure that you have research questions that are intimately tied back to your statement. So if I want to look at how people overcame, specifically African American males, how they overcame the effects of fatherlessness, I need to have one of my research questions deal with that. And so I could have had research question number 2 and number 3, 1 and 2 combined, and just looked at the effects in general. But due to previous research, I knew that there were some negative effects, but also knew that there were some surprising positive effects. So I separated those research questions. So research question number 1, what do African American males who are now adults, so you want to make sure that you're specifying who you're talking about, African American males who are now adults, what did they perceive were the negative effects or outcomes of being fatherless from childhood up to present. That childhood to present makes it very specific. And then the next one is the exact same question, but now it's looking at positive effects. So you can either deal with effects in general, or you can break those up, negative and positive. And since I had that communication piece, I want to know what were the messages that the fathers themselves communicated positively or negatively to their sons through their absence. I want to look at the messages that father figures communicated. I want to look at whether father figures were even in the lives of these individuals. And finally, I want to look at the messages that these men now communicate to their children. Because if I'm talking about them overcoming the effects of fathers, I need to have a research question that deals with how they're now behaving and interacting with their children. And so what I would say is begin to formulate, think about some research questions, but I'll talk more about this in class. And so the whole goal is to start briefing up that research statement, turn it into a purpose of study, and also turn it into a significance of study. And then I'll look over those, begin to work with you in class one-on-one, or maybe we can get into some groups and we can help each other out, which is probably what we do. Maybe I'll have you partner up or get into small groups and work on some things. And then we'll also begin to formulate some research questions. All right? So this has been Professor Theo. Once again, make sure you download that document and look at this video, and hope you have a blessed evening. Take care and God bless.